Good Friday morning, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for January the 20th. Today we are reading together in Genesis chapter 25. We're reading about some of Abraham's other children that he had through a woman named Keturah. We're going to read about his death, the descendants of Ishmael, and then the focus of Genesis shifts from Abraham to the next son of promise, which is Isaac, and then the sons that are going to be born to Isaac. And Rebekah, Jacob, and Esau. We're going to read the opening scenes of their story as is given to us here in Genesis. Again, Genesis is a story, or as a book of history. It tells the stories of the origins of mankind and the important characters that played a big part within this incredible story. Again, detailing history to us and how things went so that the world is how it is today. It teaches us a lot about why the world is the way it is. It teaches us the rising of various nations, where the nations came from. It tells us about God's way of dealing with sin, that issue. And then finally, it teaches us a bit about ourselves. So let's read together here in Genesis 25. We'll make a few notes after we get done reading, and then we'll focus in on a little bit of something, again, we can learn about ourselves. Reading here in Genesis 25, verse number 1, Abraham had taken another wife whose name was Keturah. She bore him Zimran, Jokshan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. Jokshan fathered Sheba and Dedan. Dedan's sons were the Asherim, Letushim, and Lumim. And Midian's sons were Ephah, Epher, Hanok, Abida, and El-Dah. All these were the sons of Keturah. Abraham gave everything he owned to Isaac, but Abraham gave gifts to the sons of his concubines, and while he was still alive, he sent them eastward away from his son Isaac to the land of the east. Verse number 7, this is the length of Abraham's life, 175 years. He took his last breath and died at a good old age, old and contented, and he was gathered to his people. His sons, Isaac and Ishmael, buried him in the cave of Machpelah near Mamre, in the field of Ephron, son of Zohar, the Hethites. This was the field that Abraham bought from the Hethites. Abraham was buried there with his wife Sarah. After Abraham's death, God blessed his son Isaac, who lived near Be'er Lahai Roi. Verse 12, these are the family records of Abraham's son Ishmael, whom Hagar, the Egyptian, Sarah's slave, bore to Abraham. These are the names of Ishmael's sons. Their names, according to the family records, are Nebaioth. There we go. Maybe that's right. Hadad, Tema, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedemah. These are Ishmael's sons, and these are their names by their settlements and encampments, 12 leaders of their clans. This is the length of Ishmael's life, 137 years. He took his last breath and died, and was gathered to his people, and they settled from Havilah to Shur, which is opposite Egypt as you go down toward Ashur. He stayed near his relatives. Verse 19, these are the family records of Isaac, son of Abraham. Abraham fathered Isaac. Isaac was 40 years old when he took his wife Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel the Aramean, from Padan Aram, and sister of Laban the Aramean. Isaac prayed to the Lord, to Yahweh, on behalf of his wife because she was childless. Yahweh was receptive to his prayer, and his wife Rebekah conceived. But the children inside her struggled with each other, and she said, "Why is this happening to me?" So she went to inquire of Yahweh, and Yahweh said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, two peoples will come from you and be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger." When her time came to give birth, there were indeed twins in her womb. The first one came out red-looking, covered with hair like a fur coat, and they named him Esau. After this, his brother came out, grasping Esau's heel with his hand, so he was named Jacob. Isaac was 6 years old when they were born. When the boys grew up, Esau became an expert hunter and outdoorsman. But Jacob was a quiet man who stayed at home. Isaac loved Esau because he had a taste for wild game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Once, when Jacob was cooking a stew, Esau came from the field exhausted. He said to Jacob, "Let me eat some of that red stuff because I'm exhausted." That is why he was also called Edom. Jacob replied, "First, sell me your birthright." "Look," said Esau, "I'm about to die. So what good is a birthright to me?" Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So he swore to Jacob and sold his birthright to him. Then Jacob gave bread and lentil stew to Esau. He ate, drank, got up, and went away. So Esau despised his birthright. And that is Genesis chapter 25. Going back up to the first section of this chapter, gives us a little detail about Abraham, some of Abraham's other sons, which this is a fulfillment of, again, what the Lord had promised Abraham, that many nations would come from him. And yet there's a stern warning, I think, that is found here within this text. Something that for us to learn is, just because you're a descendant of a faithful person doesn't guarantee that you yourself will be a faithful person. Abraham was the father of faith, is the father of our faith. He is seen as a great example of faith, and yet so many of his descendants went the way of paganism. So keep that in mind. There's no guarantee the way children will go, even if they are from a very faithful lineage. We learned that, I believe, here in Genesis 25 and verses 1 through 6. Abraham sends the rest of his family eastward, because, again, this land that they were in currently in Canaan, it was reserved for Isaac's descendants. He is the son of promise, which is why Abraham gave everything to him. Abraham lived to be 175 years old, which would mean he lived in Canaan about 100 years. And here, the way this language is written, or the language of what is written, talks about being contented, being gathered to his people. This seems to give some sort of indication of an afterlife, because he's not buried yet, so we can't say that this is referring to his burial. This is just in his death. So there's not a lot of detail in the Old Testament concerning the afterlife. Sheol is something that is mentioned on a number of occasions, and that seems to be probably what is in view here from what the author is stating. Isaac and Ishmael are both here to go about the burial process, which means that any maybe resentment that they had for one another, that seems to be at least reconciled for the time being. And of course, he was buried in the cave of Machpelah near Mamre, which is where Sarah was born. Again, he believed the promises of God that this would be his descendants' land, and this is where he needed to be buried. And after this, God blessed his son Isaac, who lived near Be'er Lahai Roi. Verses 12 through 18 also talk about the fulfillment of God's promises. Again, going back to chapter 16, going back to chapter 21, God promised Hagar and Abraham that Ishmael would be a great nation of himself. Many nations would come from him as well. And we see at least 12 leaders of 12 clans are mentioned here within this text. At least that's what ends up being the result of this lineage, this particular line of Abraham's lineage, prospering and procreating. It tells us that Ishmael lived 137 years. Once we get down to verse 19, again, the focus shifts to Isaac and Rebekah, and them having their children, them continuing on the lineage of Abraham. And yet we see, similar to what we saw with Abraham and Sarah, that Rebekah is unable to conceive. And for a second time, someone goes to God in prayer on behalf of the lineage of Abraham. Remember, the servant did that in the previous chapter, in chapter 24, praying that Yahweh would show him the one who was supposed to be Isaac's wife. Well, here Isaac is praying for that wife that was previously prayed for, that she would have a child. She was barren previously. The Lord is receptive to the prayer. She becomes pregnant, and then she finds out that there's something crazy going on in her womb. She has twins. She doesn't know that at the time. All she feels is this wrestling, and I can't even begin. Number one, I can't even begin to imagine what it feels like to be pregnant. Number two, I cannot imagine what it feels like to have twins in your stomach, especially wrestling about and contending with one another. Of course, this is foreshadowing the very lives that they would live. So Rebekah goes to the Lord, prays to him, and he responds to her saying that, hey, there's two nations, two peoples are in you. And guess what? The younger is going to serve, or excuse me, the older is going to serve the younger. Again, foreshadowing what's going to take place within the lives of Jacob and Esau whenever they're born. Esau comes out, he's red, and this is probably not just red from being birthed, but he was a little hairy, red-haired, hairy baby, it seems like, and that continues on later on. But as he comes out of the womb, we see Jacob grasping onto the heel, and that's what Jacob means. Jacob means he grasped the heel, and something that is shown here is that he's trying desperately to reach up and to catch up, I should say, to catch up with the first, which again is his life story. He's constantly in pursuit of what his older brother has. Now, as we continue on looking at the text here, there's some favoritism that shows up here that is going to continue, unfortunately, to be an ever-present aspect of the story of the lineage of Abraham from this point forward. Favoritism where where Isaac loves Esau. He's more of his type of guy. He's a man's man. He's a hunter. He's an outdoorsman. And then there's Jacob, who's more of a homebody. He's more of a someone who likes to stay at the house, and he becomes his mother's favorite. Isaac loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Well, this contention between the brothers, it just continues on in so many different ways. It talks about in verse 29 that one time Esau is out in the field and comes back in, and Jacob's cooking a stew, and he says, hey, let me have some of the red stuff because I'm exhausted. And then there's the little bit of detail here that says this is why, this is why he was also called Edom. Edom being a word for red, and it seems like this is going to be a derogatory term for the descendants of Esau, that this will be a reminder of what he ends up giving up. So Jacob replies, first, sell me your birthright. Sell me your physical inheritance. Now, I don't think for a second that this is the first time Jacob ever thought of it, that this was just a random idea that popped into Jacob's head. Oh, maybe I can get my brother's inheritance right now, which would have been half to 2/3 of the inheritance. And then Jacob would have been left with the rest. No, I think this is something that has been no pun intended, stewing in the mind of Jacob, that he is conniving, he is shrewd, he knew what he wanted, and I believe he also knew the character of Esau, that Esau was so entrenched in temporary things, in quickly being satisfied, that he would even be foolish enough to give up what he has here, to give up the birthright. So Esau says, look, I'm about to die, which is probably hyperbole. That's not true. He's probably not about to die. But yeah, sure. What good is my birthright to me if I want to die? There's a very strong careless indifference here from Esau. So Jacob says, all right, well, you got to swear to me first. We got to make this official. So he does. He swears to him. He sold him his birthright for a bowl of stew. He gives him the bread and the lentil stew. He ate, drank, got up, and just went away. Nothing, like nothing happened. He acts like he just made a very common exchange of, oh, here's a bowl of stew, here's you $1, and goes about his business. Again, there's this very strong, careless indifference here. And I believe that the author wants us to recognize, he wants us to put the failure here most squarely on Esau, because it doesn't say, oh, and Jacob shrewdly took the blessing from his brother. No, it says that Esau despised his birthright, the exact same thing that the Hebrew writer also highlights in Hebrews chapter 12 and verses 16 and 17. There's a great quote here from Derek Kidner. He says, if Jacob is ruthless here, then Esau is feckless, embracing the present and tangible at any cost, going through with the choice and walking away unconcerned. Esau is someone who is very much concerned with the here and now. He did not care about the future. He did not care about those things that endure, that were most important. And for that, he sells his inheritance for nothing but a bowl of soup. What might we sell our inheritance for? Now, of course, we're not talking about a physical inheritance. We're talking about spiritual inheritance, hope in heaven. What might we sell that for? What temporary thing would we be willing to give up Hopefully your answer is nothing. Hopefully our focus is strongly on the eternal, strongly on the inheritance that our hope leads us to desire so strongly and gives us confidence in having through faithfulness and confidence in Jesus. So let us not be like Esau. Let us not just so carelessly give away our inheritance. Let us not be indifferent towards that inheritance. May we live faithfully toward our God and not despise the great blessing that he has promised to us. I appreciate so much you tuning into this reading on this Friday. Hope you have a great rest of your Friday. We'll be back at it reading again tomorrow in Genesis chapter 26, where we have the promise reaffirmed to Isaac within this text. And then we see some more issues that unfortunately seem to be a bit hereditary for the family of Abraham. A little bit of deception comes into play. And we'll think about that tomorrow as we read together in Genesis chapter 26. Again, have a great Friday, everyone. Take care and God bless.